Have you ever had to deal with discouragement? I posted last night, and I believe this is true, that you either are discouraged right now, you have been discouraged, or you will be discouraged, because discouragement is a universal problem. It's a real deal of living in a fallen world. And I can't answer the question about whether you're discouraged or not, or what level you're discouraged, because really, discouragement is a house with many floors, isn't it? It's not just one level of discouragement. There's all kinds of varying degrees and levels of discouragement. So the question is not really, are you discouraged or will you be discouraged? It's, will you be faithful when you're discouraged? Will you be faithful in the midst of discouragement? Today, we're going to look again at Joseph and see how he was. If you have your Bibles, you can open them up to Genesis chapter 40. Genesis chapter 40, and in the church Bibles in the chair or on the tables upstairs, it will be on page 26. And I'm going to jump back here in a minute and read a little bit of chapter 39 to cover some things here. But I just want to talk about how Joseph remained really faithful through some terrible discouragement in his life. And I don't want to pretend that he wasn't discouraged, because he had to be discouraged. But he was faithful in the middle of it. Think about some of the discouragement we've seen in his life. Think about it. His mother died, by the way, by the time he was the age 12. And she seemed to be the most stable person in his life. His father favored him over all his other brothers in that messed up family. And so he was mistreated and abused by his brothers, and eventually he was sold into slavery by his brothers. And then, after being in slavery, he worked hard. He was a good servant. He worked his way up to a high official, to be his chief of staff, so to speak, for this man named Potiphar. And then what happened? Discouragement again. He did everything right. This guy's wife really took after him. She wanted him very badly. His boss's wife, his master's wife. And Joseph stayed away from her for as long as he could. Finally, he was caught in the middle, and he ran out, leaving his overcoat behind, his robe behind. And then she claimed it was him who was trying to rape her. And here he was at this high level, going well, and now he's back at the bottom again. And he was put in jail, in prison. He did everything right, and yet this is how he gets rewarded. I mean, don't you feel like if you're in his possession, maybe that's a little bit the way you would talk? I mean, is this the reward I get for trying to do it right? Is this the reward I get for trying to refuse temptation? Is this the reward I get for when I do what you ask me to do, when I'm obedient to you, God? You might expect Joseph to be that person, but that's not what we see, actually. What we see instead is that Joseph was faithful even when discouraged. The last part of chapter 39, beginning in verse 21, it says, "But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love." Remember, God was always faithful to Joseph. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison ward. But before long, the warden put Joseph in charge over all the prisoners and everything that happened in prison. You see, he excelled in prison, and the warden took liking to him, and the next thing you know, he's succeeding even there. Instead of sitting and wallowing in self-pity and discouragement, he's succeeding, and he's moving forward and being faithful. He was successful, and God blessed him, and he continued to be successful. So how did he do that? How could he be so faithful in the midst of so much discouragement? Well, I think we're going to see how. And what we'll see in chapter 40 is not only how he was faithful, but also how you too can be faithful in the middle of your discouragement. The first thing I want you to notice, though, is this. When you are discouraged, keep pressing on with life. Isn't that what Joseph did? He kept pressing on. He kept being faithful to what he was supposed to do. He kept doing his job. He kept excelling at whatever he was put in place to do. He didn't just keep the status quo. He didn't just wallow in self-pity. He pressed on. And I think we are tempted sometimes when we are discouraged to just give up, to just back off, to maybe just say, well, I'm just going to heal for a while. And there are certainly times for healing, but there is a point in your life when you've got to pick up yourself by your bootstraps or allow God to pick you up, and you've got to move on. That's what he did. He was faithful with his responsibilities in the prison and in the jail, and he kept being faithful and he kept doing them well. And guess what? The warden saw this. He knew he could trust Joseph, and so he put more things in charge of him. And what we're going to see is that God then sent things Joseph's way that was very important. And Joseph, in the middle of his discouragement, he kept pressing on. So what about you? When you face discouragement, do you press on or do you give up? What about with work? When you get discouraged, is it just easy to just kind of phone it in, or to call in sick, or to come in late, or just kind of be sloppy and just do it halfway? Or are you tempted to just skip out on your responsibilities, or just give up? Or do you think, you know what? God's got a purpose in having me here, and I don't know exactly what that purpose is, but I'm called to do everything with excellence as if I'm doing it to God, not to man. And do you press on and at least strive towards doing what you're supposed to be doing? Don't allow yourself to be controlled by temporary feelings. You got to understand that in life. Joseph did not allow himself to be controlled by temporary feelings, because we cannot control feelings, but we can control behavior, and we can control attitude. And so when we're down and out, I want to tell you, we have to press on. As what Paul said, that I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenly toward in Christ. Paul said, I'm pressing on. He was beat on every side. He was bit down and whipped and stoned and all those things, but he kept pressing on despite that. And I know sometimes he didn't feel like it, but he did it. And we see this in Joseph's character as well. Now, you got to understand, sometimes discouragement comes from depression, and sometimes depression is a chemical thing. There's a problem with the brain and not enough chemicals, and you need to seek treatment for that. Sometimes depression is situational, where bad things happen in your life and it's for a season, and you're going to be depressed, and sometimes it's an attitude thing, and you just need to get help with it. So I don't want to minimize things, the type of discouragement that comes from depression. But what I'm saying is, no matter whether your discouragement or is depression related or circumstantial related, here's what you got to know. Either way, you still need to press on toward the goal in which God has called you to. You still need to take one step at a time and work toward the goal, the purpose. God has created you with a purpose. Why do we press on? Because He's got a purpose for having you where you are, when you are, and just look for Him to use you there. Why do we press on? Because other people depend on us. Why do we press on? Because sometimes our failure and discouragement is just a step towards victory. Do you realize sometimes even failures is progress? We don't like to think of it that way, but the truth is sometimes we have an opportunity in our failures to grow and to do something new. One person said, every failure contains the seeds for your next success. I just been reading a book called Creative Inc. It's from one of the co-founders of Pixar movie studio. You might be familiar with them. They're owned by Disney and make a lot of wonderful movies with great stories and a lot of money on top of that. And Bob Catmull, the author of this book, talks about how at Pixar they believe failure is not just something that happens, but it is necessary to the overall big picture. Because it's in those failures that you experiment, that you take chance, that you don't walk so close to the safety net, and that you really step out and do great things. He says it's necessary to growth, and the studio believes that. Greater things are accomplished. And you know why he believes that? Because his hero was Walt Disney. And Walt Disney sure knows a lot about failure. Do you realize that Walt Disney was fired by the Kansas City Star because they told him he lacked imagination and creativity. In fact, most people who have accomplished something in life of any note have failed at some point along the way. Many of you probably realize that Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team as a sophomore. How'd that work out for him? Steven Spielberg was rejected by multiple times by the USC School of Film, and I'm pretty sure he could go there and teach now if he wanted to. And you look all down through history. Abraham Lincoln, do you realize that he lost 8 elections, twice failed at business, and suffered a nervous breakdown, but he went on to be elected president of the United States and probably is seen as the greatest president of all time. Certainly one of the most influential. Theodore Seuss Gazelle, better known as Dr. Seuss, had his first book rejected by 27 publishers. Thomas Edison failed many times in his quest to invent things like the light bulb. In fact, he said, I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways it didn't work. He went on to write, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. And I'm here to tell you that failures in life are not just common, but they are necessary to take the steps of growth that we need. And everybody who has ever succeeded at anything have had failures in their lives. So understand, when you're discouraged because you failed or because things have happened, you press on. You keep moving toward that goal. You look at Joseph, he could have easily gave up. But instead, he kept being faithful. And I don't believe he knew what the big picture was. He just trusted that there was one. There's something else we see from his story about how he overcome depression, or not depression, but really discouragement. And that's that when you're discouraged, you find someone else to encourage. That's the most neat thing of this whole story. Here he is put in jail, and yet he finds someone else to encourage. One of the biggest temptations that we have when we are discouraged is to become self-centered. Woe is me. Oh, everything's bad. But that only compounds the problem. You know this from life experience. Joseph resisted the temptation to wallow in self-pity. Instead, he focused on others' problems and was sensitive to the people's needs around us. Genesis chapter 40, verses 1 through 4. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended the royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials. He put them in prison where Joseph was, in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. Now the baker and the chief, let me explain their jobs. The baker obviously was the lead chef for the Pharaoh, the king, the big boss. And I don't know if he burnt breakfast or what, but he got put out by Pharaoh. And then we had the cupbearer. Now this was the guy that tasted the wine, the drink of Pharaoh before him in case it was poisoned. It's not a glamorous job. In other words, you got a pretty decent chance of dying here. And so his job was to taste the cup of Pharaoh. Now, we don't know what happened to make Pharaoh upset with him, whether there was a plot against him or whether they were part of something. But Pharaoh is furious with them, and he puts them in prison, in jail. And while they're there, they meet Joseph. Verse 5 says, while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. Now, in the Old Testament times in particular, when people had dreams, and they were often visions, and God did this because, let's face it, they didn't have the Word of God to guide them in the way that we do today. And that's why when we're talking about Joseph being discouraged, I'm not telling you he's reading his Bible, which I think is a great thing to do when you're discouraged, but Joseph didn't have a Bible to read in his day, right? And so they didn't have a Bible to read, so God often communicated through visions and prophets and dreams. So what I'm saying is, don't interpret every crazy dream that you have as God talking to you. Sometimes it's the lasagna you ate too late, It's not always God speaking to you through a vision. So don't over-spiritualize every single dream you have. But certainly in the Bible times, this was very, very common. And they had these dreams. And they wondered who could interpret them. Verse 8 says, and they replied, because Joseph asked them, why did they look so down? And they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Go ahead and tell me your dreams. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to give credit to God here. I'm going to tell you that you're going to people who don't know, but I'm a servant of God's, and I'm going to tell you see if God can tell me what your dreams mean, and I'll pass that on to you. But you notice Joseph took interest in them. We kind of skipped over that verse, but he asked them, why so downcast? Why are you here in the middle of his troubles? He is looking to help someone else. And they replied, and Joseph began to interpret their dreams. So isn't it interesting that Joseph took time about them? He had such a positive spirit. He's a 28-year-old man, unfairly put in prison. People have given him the shaft. And he says to the guys, why are you so down in the dumps? And so we move on with the story, and we see that Joseph continued to minister to others. And I believe it's through that type of attitude that he kept part of his positive spirit. That's how he stayed faithful. He realized this isn't all about me. There are other people with problems too. And I think some of the best things that we can do when we are discouraged, when we're on the down and out, when you want to overcome discouragement and be faithful in the middle of discouragement, is to look to someone else and help somebody else. You go on a short-term mission trip when you're down. You help a neighbor who's moving. You write a note of thank you to someone from years ago, a school teacher or something, and you'll be amazed at how when you encourage others, you'll be faithful in the midst of your discouragement. One great example of that in my life is Dan Kiefner. And a lot of you guys may know Dan Kiefner. He's been a leader in this church for many years, and ever since I've known him, he's had an ongoing battle with cancer, and he'll do treatments, and it'll go into remission, and then it'll come out of remission, and he'll do treatments, and I would be so discouraged with the battles. I know I would, and I'm sure if you know Dan as well as I do, there is discouragement at times in his life, but he doesn't sit around and wallow in his discouragement. Instead, every time his cancer comes out of remission, he thinks of the opportunities he's going to have in treatment to minister to people and to talk to people. And if you ever go with him, it's amazing. Everybody knows his name there because he knows their story, and he's talking to them, and he's encouraging them, and he's praying for them. He's constantly helping other people in the midst of his trials, and they're encouraged. But you know who else is encouraged? Dan's encouraged by it. And he sees God working. And instead of saying, why me, God? He says, what now, God? And he encourages others. And I want to be that way. It's amazing to me to think about if we all lived our life that way, how much more better spirits we would be in. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, God comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves received. I like the way the Message paraphrases that. It says this, He comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and before you know it, He brings us alongside someone else who's going through hard times so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. Are you discouraged? Find someone to encourage. There's something else I see in Joseph's story that's very powerful, though. And that's that when we're discouraged, we totally put our trust in God. When you're discouraged, you just trust God. I know it sounds cliches, and I know it seems like just something that you say, but I believe it with all my heart. When I have been in the darkest pit of my life, it's when I really realize I really do believe what I've said I believe, and I trust God is bigger than any problem I face, any discouragement thrown my way, any trial that I'll go through, any temptation that I will see. He is bigger than anything I face, and God is faithful. So when you're discouraged, put your trust in God. That's what Joseph does. After he interprets the cupbearer's dreams and the baker's dreams, you'd think, well, things are going to get better. Here's what happens. He interprets the cupbearer's dreams, and he says, you're going to be restored to your job. That's what your dream means. The chief chef does not get quite as good a news. He says, you're going to be impaled. You're going to be killed. Now he says to the chief cupbearer, hey, remember me when you go before Pharaoh, right? In other words, remember who told you about this, and maybe then he'll get me out and I can get on with what God has planned for my life. So he takes the time to trust God, because guess what happens? The guy forgets him. Listen, beginning in verse 20. Pharaoh's birthday party came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker to join the other officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Now get this verse. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Isn't it amazing how long we remember an offense, but how quickly we forget a favor? This guy forgot all about Joseph. He got back to his life, and he forgot about Joseph, leaving him in prison. In chapter 41, verse 1, we find out 2 full years later. I mean, he stayed in prison another 2+ years. Do you think he might be discouraged? But he didn't stop being faithful. He kept being faithful throughout. Joseph was in prison for 2 long years for a crime he didn't even commit. But he didn't just whine and say, I'm innocent. He just was faithful. And you can see through the rest of his story, you're going to see the next couple weeks that he continued to be faithful. What about you? Will you be faithful to God even when life doesn't make sense? There are some circumstances that you've caused in your life that you can't go back and erase. There's some difficulties that had nothing to do with your decisions, but just happened. But do you sit around and say, why me, God? Why me? Or why this? Those are natural questions. But do you instead ask the question, what now, God? Job, the guy who went through so much in the Old Testament, said, even though you slay me, I will trust you. And that should be our attitude, that in the storms of life or in the good times of life, we will still praise God. We will praise Him. We will follow Him. We will stay faithful to Him. We will trust that He has the big picture and plan. Even when we can't see it, He can see the whole thing. And even in the midst of suffering, we use it as an opportunity to bring glory to the one who will make it all right in the end. And even our light and momentary troubles are gaining for us a victory of rewards that far outweigh the troubles. In other words, when you get to heaven, you won't even think about it. It'll be a blip on the dot line of eternity. So trust God. Trust His heart when you don't see His hand, and you follow Him. Many of you face an uncertain future. Will the illness result in healing or death? Will the problems lead to reconciliation or divorce? Will a test show a benign tumor or a malignant one? Will the report card reveal that you've passed or failed? Will this be the time you can celebrate the coming of a child, or will the result be disappointment again? Will the interview bring a job or a regret to inform you? Will that wayward child get it together, or will the troubles just keep going on? I don't know the answer to those questions, and no one aside from God does. But what I can tell you is in the middle of your uncertainties, there is a certain God that is worth trusting. And I believe our God is reliable and we can trust Him. And you be faithful even in the midst of your discouragement. You press on even in the midst of your discouragement. You help others even in the midst of your discouragement. And you trust that He really will make things right. And just like Joseph's story that we'll see at the end, that what Satan intended for bad, God will use for good. He will use it not just for your good, but for His good, which ultimately could be someone else's good forever. Over these last couple weeks, I've got to see that face to face with some partners, some members of this church. And I'll just point out the mom and the dad. There's a lot of faithfulness, but Bob and Barb Perry. You might not recognize their name, but their son was the one who was brutally murdered a couple weeks ago. Yet in going through all of that, the Perrys have consistently given praise to God. They've consistently trusted Him. And yes, they are discouraged. And yes, they are distraught. And yes, they are hurting. And there's a lot more hurting to come. I'm sure of it. But they keep trusting God. They keep serving here. They keep loving people. They keep praying for the person who killed their son to find Jesus. They are faithful in the middle of discouragement. And I believe if they can do that, then so can you. And so can I. And we can trust in a great big God who will do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. God is greater than your discouragement. And someday, if not on this side, in heaven, we'll be able to look back and see the big picture. And we'll be able to see how God used even our discouragement to do great things.
Thanks to the Lord, our God and King. Why? For He is good, He is above all things. We sing praise, we sing praise. Mighty hand and outstretched arm. What? For the life that's been reborn, we sing praise, we sing praise, we sing praise, we sing praise. Forever God is faithful, forever God is strong. Forever God is with us, forever, forever. From the rising to the setting sun. How long? And by the grace of God we will carry on. And we sing praise, we sing praise, we sing praise, we sing praise. Forever God is faithful, forever God is strong, forever God is with us. Forever and ever and ever and ever, forever faithful. Forever God is strong. Forever God is with us. Forever. Show us how to dance. This is truth we're singing. Let's sing it. His love endures forever. His love endures forever. His love endures forever. Love endures forever. Loud, come on. Sing praise. We sing praise. We sing praise. We sing praise. Forever God is faithful. Forever God is strong. Forever God is with us. Forever and ever and ever and ever. Forever God is faithful. Forever God is strong. Forever God is with us. Forever. Amen.